When I got to the next beautiful spot in my rental car, my mother-in-law called. As if she had been there the whole time, it was my wife's mom. Then I asked, "Hello, Mrs. Johnson, what's up?" With a knowing look at my husband David. On the other end, her voice was crazy. "Leave David alone right now. Get your clothes in a bag and go to the bus stop by the rocks. Tell me what you're talking about, Mrs. Johnson. David is going to hit you. He's hiding a gun in the car." That's the gain she was following. I can't believe David would. "Okay, I'll leave right away." Even though my answer was a little flat, it seemed to have persuaded her. She hung up right away. "My name is Emily Johnson, and I'm 29 years old. I work in an office. David and I got married last year, but because of the COVID outbreak, we only recorded our marriage. Because we've been able to travel since the plague is over, we're planning our late vacation. Our bosses were flexible and let us take time off for our vacation. We picked a national park because we wanted to take lots of pictures, even though we haven't been married in a while. David likes to edit videos for fun, while I like to take pictures of landscapes. We've even talked about making a YouTube account just for landscape movies. Since we got married, our life has been quiet but happy, but there has been one worry. Mrs. Johnson, David's mom. Her son David has always made her happy. Whenever David and I talked about getting married, she always seemed to be against me. Her sneaky advances against me in meetings happen all the time, and what's worse is that she does them without David knowing. Insidiously, she would disparage me whenever I received compliments or expressed myself during a family gathering. "Emily, did you make this stew? There's no one else like this dish around here, but it tastes good. That tastes really good. Could you tell me how to make the stew? I'd like to make it at home if it's easy. Did you enjoy it? I'm happy. I'm going to write down the recipe right now." "That's fine, Emily, but you might also want to learn some local recipes. It will make people praise you more." It works like that most of the time. She is not complimenting my one-of-a-kind stew. Instead, she is telling me to stick to the traditional recipes and not stand out. In fact, there was a lot of snark when the family left and Mrs. Johnson and I were doing the dishes alone. A frightening woman who was always striving to stand out by preparing such a salty stew and intended to give our family hypertension or something. I took a bite. "Was it too salty for you? Next time, I'll use less salt. I no longer even want to eat your salty stew. Next time, do something more traditional." But when David comes around, she acts much differently. Uncle John told Emily, "Thanks for the stew recipe. Your dish seemed to be a hit with everyone." "Really then? That's wonderful. What do you want to eat tomorrow?" "David, Emily, and I are going to make it together." She would smile and smile her way into our talk. To change the subject, it's so obvious that it's hard to be mad about it. After that, it became kind of a joke for us. The funny part is that David already knows about her double-dealing and sly jabs. I'm always in trouble with Mrs. Johnson when her son isn't around because she thinks he doesn't see. But David, my husband, already knows her and even films or records her in secret when things get too bad. David has never liked how his mother's love is too much, which is really just too much meddling. It seems to have even crushed his hopes for the future. So when we got married, David, not me, said we couldn't live together. Even though it was a happy event, Mrs. Johnson seems to believe that I was the one who lied to him. She can't see anything around her because she loves her son too much. I'm afraid she'll do something stupid soon. Another thing is that we finally chose the details for our late trip. With our interests in mind, we chose a trip through some of the country's most beautiful spots. I'm happily getting cameras and other tools ready. David is also getting a smartphone to record movies that doesn't have a SIM card. That's why we packed a bag with clothes and toiletries. On this trip, we'll be able to see mountains and drops. I want to take beautiful pictures, so we need to check the weather forecast too. That's right. Misty and beautiful landscapes are hard to describe, but I really hope it's sunny today. As we continued to get ready, we laughed together. But Mrs. Johnson still gets in the way, even now. That was a call. Like I said, it's Mrs. Johnson. Hello, I said when I picked up the phone in front of David. I quickly put it on speakers. Hi, Kate, Emily. Are you really going to go on the trip with David? You've been married for more than a year, and now you're taking a honeymoon? What do you think? It looks like she doesn't want me to go on vacation with my husband. To deal with this, the best thing to do is show off your trip. Well, we finally don't have to follow any rules. David's business and mine have both agreed to let us take time off for our vacation, which we're going to make the most of. She took my bait and became my wife. What do you mean, have fun? It's probably just a bad trip and a cheap hotel. I feel bad for David. The things Mrs. Johnson said made David frown and keep quiet. David was the one who planned this trip, not a travel agency. I changed how I spoke after seeing David's face. No, it's not a cheap hotel at all. David set everything up. We're staying at a very fancy hotel with a great view. The food is also 5 stars, but the prices are very low. I spoke nicely on purpose to make Mrs. Johnson angry. I'm always getting picked on, and this time she was making fun of the trip that David planned. A really high-end hotel. Why do you want to go with David? I want to go on that trip. David would want to show me how thankful he is for his family. After hearing about the very fancy hotel, she couldn't keep quiet. Now she's saying she wants to go on the trip herself. This is not the kind of honeymoon that a mother would crash. It's not going to happen. It's rude to step in on your son and daughter-in-law's long-awaited vacation. We'll make sure you have a souvenir. Saying goodbye, I hung up the phone, picturing Mrs. Johnson's angry face. I laughed meanly, and when I hung up, David had his head held up in front of me. I'm sorry about my mom, Emily. She tried to ruin our holiday, which I can't believe. She probably just wanted to express her deep affection for her son, she explained. Don't be worried about it. There was a hint of worry in my voice as I smiled at David, because I was so angry at her. I beat her at her own game, but I might have failed. What would happen if Mrs. Johnson got really excited about our vacation and started bothering us? This fear of mine turned out to be right in the end. From that point on until the trip left, Mrs. Johnson didn't say a word, not even a call. I thought she would tell David bad things about me. That also didn't happen. Even though her quiet scared me, we went on our getaway as planned. David's choice of beautiful places worked out perfectly, and I was happy with the whole thing. It was the best in every way. The view, the services, the food, everything. That's why I told Mrs. Johnson how great it was. We even asked the hotel staff to take a shot of us having dinner together. David, I'm so full. Thank you so much for setting this all up, I said as I fell asleep on the hotel bed. It felt so soft and cozy on the bed. David, my husband, was very happy to see me rolling around in bed. He said, I'm glad you like it. Let's go to the spa after you've had a chance to rest. I'll look at the pictures and movies we took today while we wait. The health spa. What a wonderful place. David suddenly raised his voice. He had been opening his laptop and watching me enjoy the soft bed. I finally asked, what's going on here? When I heard something strange in David's voice, I got out of bed and looked at his computer. Our plan for today was to rent a car and get around. We parked the rental car and took pictures and movies at every beautiful place we went. In some places, you could see the rental car in the background. That wasn't a problem in and of itself, but there were times when a strange person, who looked like a small woman, was hanging out near the rental car. Even though we couldn't see her face, we thought the strange person was a small woman. The suspect was opening the car door every once in a while. Oh, look at this. Because we were only there for a short time, we didn't lock the car, David said in a low voice through the screen. I knew what kind of hat the suspicious person was wearing. Hey, this hat. Doesn't Mrs. Johnson have one like this? When I said, yes, Mrs. Johnson has a similar hat, David's face went pale. That's correct. This is my mom's hat. David and I looked at the computer screen with wide eyes. The person who seemed sketchy was putting something black into the rental car. They looked like Mrs. Johnson. She looked like she was taking something out of the trip bag that she had left in the rental car. Then, after some time, the strange person left without taking anything. Something was put in the bag for the trip. I quickly threw it out. It had a strange weight to it. I didn't notice the change in weight because the bellman carried it for us when we got to the hotel. It was a bag with clothes and toiletries in it, but nothing important. It looked like nothing was stolen. After that, a strange thing came out of the bottom of the bag. What came out shocked David and me. What is this? You're kidding me? We were both very tired when we left the hotel the next morning. Because of the amazing thing that came out of the bag the day before, we were very busy. The phone almost always rang at the exact moment we got to the next beautiful spot in the rental car. It came from Mrs. Johnson. David was on the phone, so I told him to pick up. Hello, Mrs. Johnson, what's going on? The person on the other end of the phone from Mrs. Johnson sounded very upset. Get away from my kid right now. Get the bag with extra clothes in it and go to the Cape's bus stop. How does she know there's a bus stop close to the Cape where we're on vacation? What about our luggage? How does she know about things like the bag with the extra clothes? She called at just the right time, so I think she's probably hiding and watching somewhere. There were a lot of confusing parts of the call, so I asked Mrs. Johnson for a reason. Tell me what you're talking about, Mrs. Johnson. David is getting ready to attack you? He has a gun hidden in the car. Oh, I see. That's the case. I pretended to follow Mrs. Johnson's lead, even though I already knew everything. It's not possible. David is hitting me. Okay, I get it. I'm leaving now. Even though my answer was a little stiff, I think I was able to trick Mrs. Johnson. Mrs. Johnson hung up right away. I waved to David, who was driving, and then took the bag and went to the bus stop. I didn't forget to act scared, of course. After that, I called the cops. After about 5 minutes, I got to the Cape's bus stop, where an investigator in an unmarked police car met me. Well, yesterday's prediction came true. The agent looked upset and said, I never thought you'd really call it in. I'm truly sorry that I took part in this joke. Please come with me. I think David should have caught Mrs. Johnson by now. As I drove back to the rental car, the investigator followed me in his plainclothes car. Yes, I could hear Mrs. Johnson's words from where we parked the rental car. Hey, David, how did you know where I was? It looked like Mrs. Johnson had no idea that her evil plan would be found out ahead of time. My husband found her hiding in the shade of a gazebo in the parking lot and caught her. Not right now. Today, I won't forgive you. Mrs. Johnson was scared by the way her husband looked like a demon. She was even more shocked when she saw me come back with the detective. As Mrs. Johnson had planned, I had a travel bag in my hand. The moment Mrs. Johnson saw it, she yelled, Officer, arrest that woman right away. There's a gun in that bag, she says. She wants to use it to kill my son. Mrs. Johnson yelled at me in that manner, displaying a proud expression as she did so. I stood still in front of Mrs. Johnson and dumped the bag's contents on the ground. The pants were wrapped up in a small bag so that the men wouldn't be able to see them. While Mrs. Johnson looked for something, she couldn't find it. What? Where is the gun? It should be there since I put it there yesterday. Is this the gun you are looking for? The detective showed Mrs. Johnson a picture. It was a picture of a hunting gun put in a plastic bag. Upon seeing the picture the detective showed, Mrs. Johnson's face went pale. That shooting gun belonged to my late father-in-law, didn't it? Honestly, how did you manage to open the gun safe? When I found it yesterday, I thought my heart would stop. I gave it to the cops right away after calling them. Mrs. Johnson clenched her teeth and looked down when she heard my voice and the voice of my husband. Oh, Emily is to blame because it was in her bag. It has nothing to do with me. Mrs. Johnson began yelling out of panic. My husband and I both let out big sighs. The officer then came up to Mrs. Johnson with a big smile on his face. Yes, we had to ask Emily about it since it was in her bag. Yesterday was supposed to be a holiday, but we questioned her for hours. Why did you know that Emily's gun was in her room bag? Even though the detective was happy, his voice was soft. I can see why he's mad. Besides, the shooting gun was taken out without permission. even though it wasn't trained. It was in Emily's bag, though. Because Mrs. Johnson couldn't face the detective, she desperately tried to explain herself. "Oh, so you saw Emily's travel preparations, but you and Emily's family are separated, aren't you?" "Of course, we're separated, and we haven't let her into our house for a year." When that was said, Mrs. Johnson yelled back, "Don't speak out of turn." The police officer pressed Mrs. Johnson even more. "Oh no, were you watching Emily's house?" "No, that's not a good thing to do. You need to go to the station with us." Mr. Johnson freaked out when she heard the detective's line, which sounded like it came straight from a police show. "No, I wasn't spying, so you can't take me against my will. I put that gun in there." "Oh," she told everyone on her own. "Well, I had already said it earlier when I turned the bat inside out." Before this, the detective had been happy, but now he wasn't. "All right, a confession. You'll be coming with us on your own because you broke the gun rule." Mrs. Johnson was shocked when the detective spoke. "What? Why? Didn't I say I wasn't spying?" When Mrs. Johnson spoke out against it, her son got very angry. "It makes sense, Mom. The gun your dad gave you was yours, but you don't have a shooting license. There would be no problem if the father-in-law, who had a shooting license, carried it properly for the right reason. You can't take it out of the gun safe because you don't have a shooting license." Mrs. Johnson didn't seem to know anything about gun rules or how to handle guns. I don't know how she got it this far without an accident, even though the live ammo was kept separate and not put into the gun. Even so, Mrs. Johnson still refused. But it had to be in that woman's bag when it was found at the hotel. "That woman took it from my house. I'm not to blame." His mother, Mrs. Johnson, was acting badly, so her son got angry. "I recorded yesterday when Mom put a gun in her rental car. Of course, I gave it to the cops." What David said made Mrs. Johnson weak in the knees. "What? How? How did you learn about it?" She was so angry that tears filled her eyes. "I told them instead of him. Yesterday, David was recording and got a shot of the parking lot. We didn't see it at the time, but we did see it when we watched the video at the hotel." Mrs. Johnson could no longer disagree with what I said. At this point, the officer told Mrs. Johnson, who was shocked, "Now, Mrs. Kate Johnson, we'd like you to come with us to the station because we think you broke gun laws." When David said those words, Mrs. Johnson's face turned sad. "Why, David? Why is that woman better than me? Are you leaving your mom?" The detective pushed Mrs. Johnson, who was yelling, into the empty police car. "You might not want to make a fuss. When I called the house yesterday to check the gun's serial number, your son's grandma, who I think is an old woman, was very angry. As soon as the agent said that, Mrs. Johnson calmed down. That grandmother is David's grandmother. She is old, but she is still healthy and doesn't show any signs of dementia. She's pretty much in charge of the Johnson family. At this point, Mrs. Johnson is completely giving in to her. She's the head of the family, but she's not mean to other people. When I go to see my in-laws, she's always so happy to see me and calls me Emily dear. She is nice, but Mrs. Johnson has to do her jobs the right way. Her own room and bathroom were taken care of by her. What made her so mad must have been pretty tough, I said under my breath. The detective told me, "It looks like your husband's grandmother has been keeping the shooting gun as a keepsake since your father-in-law died. But the other day, the box with the memory in it was broken into. When they found out that, it caused the current fuss. Her anger was unbearable." I see. To get the key, Mrs. Johnson must have searched her whole room. I told her, it's easy to see how angry she would be that her son's keepsake was broken. After handing over the rifle at the station, I asked to take a picture of it for her so she could at least keep a photograph as a memento. I said, "My husband's grandmother was mean to Mrs. Johnson. She had cried and said sorry to me and David. A family member who went to pick her up said that she yelled at Mrs. Johnson in a way that could be heard all over the neighborhood for more than 30 minutes. Oh, your grandmother really does get that mad. That's why Mom always did what Grandma said. Now everyone in the neighborhood knows what Mom did wrong," I said. Yes, thanks to his grandma's lecture, The incident became widely known, and Mrs. Johnson could no longer walk the streets. When his grandmother found out that David had broken up with her, she got permission from the police station and the prosecutor's office to send Mrs. Johnson to a farm run by a relative in the Nebraska mountains, in an area that looks like a basin. She could come back, but it would take 3 hours to get here by car. She was working so hard on the farm that she couldn't possibly get away. After some time, it turned out that I was pregnant. The family, my husband, and his grandma were all very happy. His grandmother was already excited about having a great-grandchild and started to work on making her legs stronger. My husband and her are going to fight to see who can take the baby for walks in the pram. I hope she doesn't drop the great-grandchild while holding it. She has also begun to improve the strength of her upper body. It's nice to see her getting her mood back. She was really down because of Mrs. Johnson's fuss. My husband and I are getting all of the baby stuff together today. I'd like to live with your grandmother if it's possible. She's really excited about it, and it looks like she'll live a long time following the birth, taking care of the child with grandma. I told them, we'll figure it out some way. Well, if she lives longer, I'll be happy to. My husband said, I'll talk to grandma about it. I took out the camera. I rubbed my belly and said, when the baby is born, I'm going to take lots of pictures of the baby, my husband, his grandmother, and the rest of the family.
Leave, you useless old ladies who can't even clean properly. My husband and I, who were living with our eldest son and his wife, were giving $3,000 to help with expenses every month. But his wife would often insult us with hurtful words and make life difficult for us. We were fed up and angry. We didn't want anything to do with her anymore and decided to get back at her someday. My name is Susie. I'm 62 years old and work part-time while also taking care of our home. I live with my husband David, who is the same age as me. David works in an office and is a kind and serious man, so we have a stable income and rarely argue. Our son, Lawrence, is 32 years old. He's just like his dad, kind-hearted and responsible. After finishing university, he got a job at a private company and is working hard. 2 years ago, he married a woman named Emily, whom he met at work. However, it turned out that Emily was actually a very mean person. When we first met her, she appeared to be serious and nice. Lawrence assured us that she was hardworking at her job and had a good relationship with her bosses. Emily is 6 years younger than Lawrence, and although we weren't sure if they would get along, we trusted Lawrence's judgment. After they got married, Lawrence and Emily moved into their own apartment. Emily promised to take care of all the household chores so Lawrence could focus on his work. Lawrence seemed appreciative of her help. He often said, "Thanks to Emily taking care of everything at home, I can concentrate on my job." I'm grateful. My husband and I believed that our son had chosen a good wife. But Emily's true nature began to emerge gradually. We had a family gathering for New Year's, and when I saw Emily, I didn't even recognize her at first. She looked completely different. The last time I saw her, she had black hair and wore minimal makeup, appearing reserved. But now, she had transformed into a bold woman with pink hair, wearing loud bracelets on her wrists. She seemed like a whole different person. My husband, David, and the rest of our family were surprised by Emily's drastic change. Lawrence tried to smooth things over. "I'm sorry if this caught you off guard." I was also surprised when I came home from work one day to find Emily like this. But she manages the household well, and we don't have any problems. Plus, Emily is a full-time homemaker. Can we overlook this? After hearing Lawrence's explanation, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. Well, if Lawrence is fine with it, then so am I. I was just taken aback by how different Emily looks now. It's not fair to judge someone solely based on appearances, and it's not my place to complain. My family seemed to agree with my sentiment. Later, we all had a good time drinking together until Emily caused a scene. She got extremely drunk and started hurling insults at everyone around her. "You dare to defy me?" I once took down 3 classmates at once back in middle school. It became evident that she had a tendency to become aggressive when intoxicated. She even directed hurtful words at me and David, yelling, "Stop clinging onto life needlessly, you old pests. Nobody is pleased that you're still alive." Her words cut deep. There's a limit to what's acceptable, even under the influence of alcohol. David looked furious, and Lawrence was visibly shocked. Hey, even for a drunken conversation, you've crossed the line. Apologize. However, Emily didn't even listen to Lawrence. You dump all the chores on me, then have the guts to lecture me, a weakling like you. I could take you down in a heartbeat. Emily kept on with her verbal assault, causing chaos and trouble for everyone around. Eventually, she passed out from the alcohol and the tension eased, but the mood remained sour. Everyone was furious with Emily. Then one of the relatives brought up Emily's earlier claim about defeating classmates. Was she a troublemaker in the past? They asked. No, Lawrence replied. Emily graduated from a public university. I always thought she was a serious person. But the relative remained doubtful. Do we have any proof she's been on the straight and narrow? Maybe we should dig into Emily's past to see what kind of person she really is. I agreed with the idea. It might be worth looking into, I said. Lawrence promised to investigate further. Since Emily had no living parents and few ties to her relatives, he decided to hire a private investigator. The investigation uncovered that Emily had been quite rebellious during her middle school years and even led a group of troublemakers. She was so infamous that even the local troublemakers followed her lead since she was in 9th grade. Concerned about her future, Emily started to put on a more serious facade. Despite graduating from a public university, she remained connected with her rowdy group of friends. Even now, when Lawrence was at work, Emily would invite these troublesome friends over, causing disturbances that annoyed the neighbors. It became clear that Emily was hiding her true nature. She was indeed a troublemaker. Frustrated by this behavior, Lawrence brought up the idea of divorce. However, Emily reacted with tears and pleading. I'm sorry. I'll change and be more serious. Please forgive me. I need you, Lawrence. Please don't leave me. She even reverted to her old appearance and deleted her friends' contacts from her phone right in front of Lawrence. She apologized to the relatives she had upset during the New Year's gathering and repeatedly called me to apologize. Seeing her efforts, Lawrence began to reconsider his decision. As a result, Lawrence and Emily decided not to divorce and opted to continue their married life. Since Lawrence was the one married to Emily, my husband, and I felt it wasn't our place to interfere too much. So we respected Lawrence's decision. When I saw Emily again at the family summer gathering, she seemed to have become a more serious person, and I hoped things would be fine from then on. However, one day while I was at my part-time job, I strained my back while lifting a heavy object. The pain was so severe that I couldn't move. My colleagues rushed me to the hospital, where I was diagnosed with a significant back strain and advised to rest. When I called Lawrence to tell him about it, he suggested something unexpected. Why don't you come and live with us? Both Emily and I, along with Dad, could take care of you. At your age, incidents like these might happen more often, and it would be better if we were there to help. As I pondered the idea, it seemed like a sensible solution. Once my back pain had subsided, my husband, Lawrence, Emily, and I sat down and discussed the idea of living together. We all agreed it made sense, especially considering our spacious single-family home. With no space issues, Lawrence and Emily moved in with us, and we began our shared living arrangement. Initially, everything went smoothly. Emily took on half of the household chores, which lightened my load significantly. My husband and I contributed financially, providing around $3,000 each month to cover expenses. Although my part-time job limited my financial contribution, I wanted to ease the financial strain on Lawrence and Emily as much as possible. However, Emily's behavior started to change gradually. She began claiming she wasn't feeling well and started pushing more of the household responsibilities onto me. Initially, I believed her and took on the extra chores, but I soon noticed inconsistencies. She appeared perfectly healthy, eating hearty meals and even going out for leisure activities all day. Feeling perplexed, I confronted Emily gently, expressing my concerns. I hate to question this, but are you truly unwell? You seem energetic and spend a lot of time outside. Emily's response was a fierce glare. Why are you doubting me? She snapped. If you keep this up, I'll give you a piece of my mind. I was taken aback by her coarse language. It was evident she felt no remorse. She was likely only pretending to change to avoid losing Lawrence. Emily, sensing my shock, scoffed, Are you scared, Aria? Well, get used to it. I've played the quiet girl for too long. It's time for me to be myself. You're aware of the consequences if you continue, right, Emily? It seemed Emily had used intimidation tactics before, perhaps during her school days. This behavior had carried over into adulthood, where she could manipulate others to get her way. While I couldn't deny feeling afraid of Emily, I hadn't lived 62 years to be pushed around. Holding my ground, I warned her sternly, if your behavior crosses the line, it could be considered a crime, you know? I'm not here to obey your orders like a robot. If you push too far, I won't hesitate to involve the authorities. Emily appeared surprised by my unexpected response, but she quickly fired back, "Shut up, old woman. I'll never forgive you." Her outburst startled David and Lawrence, who rushed to see what was happening. They were both home since it was their day off. After briefly explaining the situation, David and Lawrence frowned. It was decided that the four of us would discuss the matter. Diva. David addressed Emily firmly. Firstly, apologized to Susie. However, Emily refused to apologize. Instead, she crossed her arms defiantly. Why should I apologize to an old woman? I thought Susie would handle the household chores, so I agreed to live together. But my workload hasn't decreased as I expected. It's only gotten worse. Emily's next words were even more shocking. No matter what anyone says, I won't change. From now on, you'll all do as I say. Oh, but Susie and David are useless. You two old hags can leave since you don't even contribute to the household chores. Her words ignited a fire within me. I've had it with this woman. I resolved firmly to seek revenge. My usually calm husband seemed equally furious, his face flushed with anger. Should we leave now feeling the same? He asked. Or should I distance myself from Emily immediately? I nodded in agreement, saying, yes, let's go. My husband and I swiftly packed our belongings and left without delay. Although we said we were moving out, we couldn't take large items like dressers, so we planned to return for them later. Lawrence mentioned he still needed to talk to Emily, so he chose to stay behind. My husband and I headed to a budget hotel for the time being. We didn't own another house, and we didn't want to burden our friends, so we opted to stay there until we found a new place. The next morning, Emily began bombarding my cell phone with calls starting at 8 a.m. Initially, I considered ignoring them, but her persistence was relentless, with 20 calls in just 1 hour. Though I regretted not blocking her number sooner, I felt a twinge of curiosity about her intentions, prompting me to answer once. Hello, is this Susie? Emily's voice sounded unnaturally sweet on the other end. Instantly, I sensed mischief brewing, and frankly, it gave me the creeps. From her serious demeanor to her sudden shift to a cutesy persona, I couldn't help but wonder how many faces Emily could wear. Regardless, one thing was clear. I couldn't trust her, no matter which version showed up. Realizing the futility of continuing the conversation, I simply replied, no, thank you, and promptly ended the call. I blocked her number and barred her from all messaging apps to prevent further contact. My husband, observing my actions, followed suit. As a united front, we decided to cut off all communication from Emily indefinitely. Later in the afternoon, Lawrence called me. Mom, I've divorced Emily. I left the house early this morning and just submitted the divorce papers. He explained that when he had informed Emily of his decision the previous night, her response had been dismissive. Try if you can. With no hesitation, Lawrence proceeded with the divorce. Upon hearing this news, I couldn't help but feel relieved. Staying with someone like Emily would never lead to happiness. I shared with Lawrence that Emily had called earlier, acting strangely cutesy. Lawrence's expression soured at the mention of Emily's behavior. You know, back when Emily was rebellious, she would resort to acting cute to smooth things over with her boyfriend whenever things got awkward. She's incredibly naive if she thinks that tactic will work now that we're all adults. His sentiment resonated with me completely. Emily's been cheating too. What, really? I was genuinely taken aback. The thought that she would add infidelity to her already despicable behavior was beyond belief. Her claims of illness seemed increasingly dubious to me. She appeared perfectly healthy and went out far too often. Suspecting there was more to her story, I decided to hire a private investigator. The results were shocking. Emily had been cheating with an unknown man. Lawrence even provided photographic evidence showing Emily kissing a young man in public, his green hair making him stand out. I warned Emily that I pursue legal action against her, and I fully intend to. I'll also seek damages from her affair partner, Lawrence informed me. As I examined the photos he sent to my phone, Emily's nonchalant attitude in response to the accusations puzzled me. Then why did she call me? I pondered aloud. Who knows? Maybe she wanted to know where I was after I moved out. Emily never expected me to leave. She thought if she acted tough and intimidating, I'd stay, Lawrence surmised. But now that I'm gone for real, I think she panicked and tried to win me back. I sighed deeply. Regardless of her motives, I had no desire to aid someone like her. I hoped she would experience the full weight of loneliness on her own. After some time, my husband Lawrence and I managed to secure a new apartment where we could all live together. Initially, we contemplated evicting Emily from our old house and returning there. But considering its size and potential vacancy in the future, we deemed it more practical to sell it off. Lawrence agreed, expressing his willingness to part with the property. Living there isn't a necessity for me. Selling it sounds like the best option, he remarked. As for Emily losing her place, it was of little concern to us. With the help of relatives, we returned to the old house to retrieve our belongings. To our dismay, Emily greeted us with a smug grin, suggesting that we resume living together. I realized I can't bear loneliness. Wouldn't it be better for us all to live together again? Plus, I want to save money and avoid paying Lawrence any alimony, she proposed audaciously. Her bold request ignited my simmering anger. If you're going to make a request, at least do so humbly. This isn't a matter for jest. No matter how you plead, I won't entertain it, I snapped. David, my husband, interjected with a cold tone. We're selling this house, so leave promptly and fulfill your obligations to Lawrence. I could never forgive you. Stop attempting to reignite our relationship. Lawrence echoed his sentiments firmly. Emily's flirtatious facade crumbled at his words. Lawrence has a stable income, so I initially thought marrying him would allow me to relax and become a housewife. But now, there's no ulterior motive. I truly love Lawrence. And of course, I need both of you, Susie and David, Emily insisted. However, her words did little to quell the seeking anger within us. Mine, David's, and Lawrence's, only serving to stoke the flames further. In that tense moment, a previously silent relative, who had been observing the situation, couldn't remain silent any longer. They interrupted Emily with a firm voice. Emily, you are a despicable woman. If you have so much to say, why don't we settle this with a fair fight? You seem confident about your strength. With a hint of intimidation, the relative revealed their physical prowess, reminding Emily that they had competed in a national karate competition. This relative in their 30s was well known for their strength, and we had called them in case Emily decided to cause trouble. Sensing the imminent threat, Emily recoiled. No, I don't want to fight. Once you leave, don't ever bother Susie and the rest again. Leave quickly, but before you do, offer a proper apology, the relative warned in a low voice, exuding an intimidating presence. Emily, subdued by the imposing atmosphere, acquiesced with a whimper. Emily's sudden change in demeanor caught us off guard as she swiftly replied, Yes, I understand. I'll leave immediately. I'll leave all my large belongings here. I'm truly sorry, she groveled. Good riddance. Packing her belongings and departing, the relative smirked. It was evident that Emily's tough facade crumbled in the face of those she perceived as stronger. As David, Lawrence, and I watched her retreat, we couldn't help but burst into laughter. With the nuisance finally gone, our moving preparations proceeded seamlessly, and we successfully relocated to our new home without any trouble. Following her departure, Emily rented an apartment and began living alone. True to Lawrence's warning, he filed for alimony, which Emily and her lover promptly paid, likely due to the involvement of a lawyer. It appeared that Emily couldn't stand up to someone with greater power, as my relative had predicted. Since then, I've kept my distance from Emily, but I've heard about her activities through various sources. News reports and conversations with acquaintances have painted a picture of Emily's life following her departure. Initially, Emily depleted most of her savings to fulfill her alimony obligations. With plans to marry her former affair partner and rely on his income, she was left in the lurch when he severed all ties. Desperate for stability, she attempted a job at a private company only to quit abruptly after clashing with her boss. In a shameless bid for financial support, she approached me, my husband, and Lawrence at our workplaces, but we steadfastly ignored her pleas, causing her to eventually give up. Facing mounting debt and rejection from her former associates, Emily's desperation led her to assault one of her gang members in a fit of rage, resulting in her arrest and subsequent imprisonment. My husband, Lawrence, and I couldn't help but feel that she had reaped what she sowed. Emily had a history of troublemaking, never showing any remorse for her actions. It seemed only fitting that she faced the consequences of her behavior behind bars, where she could hopefully reflect on her choices. In stark contrast, my husband, Lawrence, and I were enjoying peaceful, contented lives. The three of us lived harmoniously together, and we even had plans for a trip on our next extended weekend. Our apartment offered the convenience of easy cleaning and proximity to the station, making it a wise choice for our new home. We were determined to continue cherishing our tranquil existence as a family of three. Enough of this racket. Get out of here with that baby right now. My husband's angry shout pierced the silence of the night, driving us out into the chill of the changing season. With mornings growing colder and the threat of imminent rain, I felt the sting of desperation claw at my bones. I'm freezing. If we stay out here, we'll freeze to death, I muttered to myself, clutching our 3-month-old daughter tightly wrapped in her blanket. Despite my relentless knocking, there was no response from inside. Helpless, I hugged my crying child closer, and we stumbled on. Each step felt heavier as exhaustion settled in. Please let us in, I pleaded with the empty darkness, but the night offered no solace. Wandering aimlessly, I found myself sitting on a bench in the park, my body frozen to the core. Tears flowed freely as the events leading to our plight played out in my mind. How did we end up like this? My name is Olivia, 31 years old. Left orphaned by my parents' divorce in middle school, I was later devastated by my mother's tragic accident 2 years ago. Alone and desperate, Benjamin, a college classmate turned husband, became my anchor. His promises of support and love offered a glimmer of hope in my darkest days. But since learning about my pregnancy, Benjamin's demeanor shifted. His warmth turned to frost, his kindness replaced by indifference. Despite my morning sickness and struggles, his patience wore thin, leaving me to fend for myself. I hoped our daughter's birth would mend our fractured bond, but it only widened the chasm between us. His absence grew pronounced, his anger palpable. Every night echoed with his complaints, his resentment towards our crying baby tearing at my heart. This life, once filled with dreams of a happy family, now felt like a nightmare of loneliness and despair. My husband seemed to have an invisible shield against childcare responsibilities, always deflecting them with claims of being swamped with work. Even on his supposed days off, relaxation at home was a foreign concept to him, opting instead to gallivant around town from dawn till dusk. Left alone to tend to our baby, I found myself drained, both physically and emotionally. Each night, our daughter's cries intensified, mirroring my own mounting distress. One fateful evening, my husband's simmering frustration boiled over. Get out of this house with that baby right now. His words cut through the air like a blade, leaving me stunned. I can't do that, I stammered, but before I could plead my case, we were cast out into the biting cold, devoid of essentials like keys, wallet, or phone. Helplessness washed over me as I clung to my daughter, wrapping her tightly in a blanket to shield her from the chill. With weary steps, we trudged on until exhaustion forced me to collapse on a park bench, my mind a whirlwind of despair. How had our once promising life devolved into this chaos? As if in response to my silent lament, my daughter's cries pierced the night air once more, a painful reminder of my failure. Just as the cold began to numb my senses, a voice shattered the silence. Are you okay? The concern in the stranger's voice momentarily transported me, as if my own mother had reached out from beyond. As I looked up, a woman stood before me, her eyes filled with compassion. My husband kicked me out because of her baby's crying, I explained, the words heavy with shame. Without hesitation, the stranger extended a lifeline. Come stay at my place, she offered, her kindness a beacon of hope in the darkness. As I hesitated, unsure whether to accept her generosity, she gently took my daughter into her arms, instantly calming her restless cries. It's okay, don't worry. Let's go somewhere warm for the baby's sake. Entering her home felt like stepping into a sanctuary. My daughter was cocooned in a soft blanket, offered a comforting glass of hot milk, and cradled in the stranger's arms, her gentle snores filling the room with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in far too long. I couldn't believe it. No matter how hard I tried, the baby just wouldn't settle. It can be quite a challenge if you're not accustomed to it. As a recent grandmother, I found myself occasionally caring for the little one, perhaps explaining my newfound sensitivity to a baby's cries. Checking on the source of the noise, I found myself face to face with a woman, gentle smile easing the tension in the room. She seemed around the same age as my mother, radiating warmth that instantly put me at ease. "I'm sorry for intruding like this," I murmured, feeling a wave of gratitude for her understanding. "It's okay," she reassured me, her kind eyes reflecting empathy. "We should help each other out in times of need. Do you need a ride home? Do you live nearby?" I hesitated, memories of being cast out still fresh in my mind. "No, I might just get thrown out again," I confessed, my voice faltering. Without missing a beat, she offered her hospitality. Her kindness moved me to tears once more. "Thank you so much," I whispered, introducing myself. "My name is Olivia." As the conversation flowed, a sudden realization dawned on me. "Wait a minute, isn't your baby's name Anne?" Her nod confirmed my suspicion. "Yes, but how did you?" It turns out, this woman was Jackson, my husband's direct superior. She had sent us a gift when Anne was born, hence her familiarity with our daughter's name. The coincidence caught me off guard, and I regretted airing my grievances about my husband to her. "We're always grateful for your help," I said, my mind racing with newfound information. "The thing is, my husband has been busy with work lately, and he seems quite tired." Jackson's response stunned me. "That can't be right. Your husband has been on parental leave for the past 2 months. My heart skipped a beat as her words sank in. "But he says he goes to work every day," I protested, confusion clouding my thoughts. "He even said he has work tomorrow." "It's a holiday. The office will be closed," Jackson explained, her tone tinged with concern. "I wonder what he's up to." I was blindsided by the revelation that my husband, whom I believed was tirelessly working, was actually on vacation. However, the pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fall into place. I couldn't shake off the sense of anticipation that seemed to linger on the days my husband was supposed to be at work. Ever since I became pregnant, his behavior had taken a noticeable shift, leaving me with a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. As I pondered how to investigate further, Jackson suggested a bold idea. "Why don't you check his social media?" she proposed, gesturing towards a computer in the corner of the room. I accepted her offer gratefully and began scrolling through my husband's online presence. What I discovered left me reeling in shock. A trove of photos featuring him and another woman, seemingly inseparable. They looked like a couple. "That's Ava," Jackson explained, her voice tinged with sympathy. "She worked at our company for only 3 months before recently quitting." The pieces fell into place, confirming my worst fears. Though I had harbored suspicions, the reality of my husband's affair hit me harder than I had anticipated. Do you know her address, her contact information?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. But Jackson hesitated, her concern evident. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have mentioned her name. It's personal information, and I can't disclose it," she replied gently, offering me solace in my moment of vulnerability. As I deflated, Jackson extended her support. "I'll do everything I can to help with anything else," she assured me. But my attention was drawn back to the screen, where a series of photos showcased my husband and his mistress living a life of luxury, dining at the prestigious Paris hotel. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. With no income during my maternity leave and our combined savings dwindling, there was no way he could afford such extravagance. "No way. This can't be happening," I whispered, my heart heavy with disbelief. With trembling hands, I logged into my bank account online, hoping against hope for a different outcome. But what I found only confirmed my worst fears. My savings of $250,000 vanished. The inheritance I received after my mother's tragic car accident had been cut in half, leaving me stunned and motionless for what felt like an eternity. "What's wrong?" Jackson's concerned voice broke through my daze. "My husband has been using my savings without my permission," I confessed, the betrayal cutting deep. "I have reserved those funds for our daughter's future, trusting my husband to keep them safe." But as I reflected on recent events, the pieces began to fall into place. Leaving my debit card with him during my hospitalization for childbirth had been a mistake. He hadn't visited me once during that time, and the first withdrawal from my savings coincided with the day I handed him the card. I had never doubted his integrity, believing he had locked it away securely. "I can't forgive him," I murmured, the weight of his deception crushing my spirit. "He's been using my beloved mother's inheritance without my permission." Determined to expose his deceit, I accepted Jackson's offer of a digital camera. The next day, we watched from the car as my husband, wearing a self-satisfied smirk, left our house without a second thought for our daughter and me. His carefree demeanor grated against my raw emotions, fueling my resolve. As expected, his car eventually pulled up at the Paris hotel, his mistress in tow. With practiced ease, they strolled into the restaurant, oblivious to the pain they caused. Entrusting our daughter to Jackson's care, I took a seat behind them, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. "I've had enough of Olivia's stubbornness," my husband's callous words echoed in my ears. "Finally kicked her out last night. Now she's filed for divorce. I'll get the compensation from her mother's accident, and maybe even alimony." "You're despicable," Jackson retorted, her disgust palpable. "Your wife doesn't even realize you're after her money. You've been using her vulnerability since her mother passed away, but having a child was an unexpected obstacle." The shock of his admission left me speechless, my mind reeling with disbelief. Oblivious to my turmoil, my husband swaggered towards the elevator with his mistress, the key to their hotel room dangling from his fingers. As I stealthily followed them, even though it was just a fleeting moment before the elevator arrived, they embraced and began to kiss. Despite bracing myself, witnessing the affair unfold before my eyes was agonizing. A shiver ran down my spine as my husband's callous words echoed in my ears. "This is a pre-celebration for kicking Olivia out. Let's have a blast today." Unable to find my voice, I watched helplessly as the elevator doors closed, swallowing them up and leaving me behind. Frustration and sadness overwhelmed me, rendering me unable to stand. Collapsing to my knees, I felt a profound shift within me. The grief that had gripped my heart began to morph into a simmering desire for revenge. Betrayal of this magnitude was too cruel to ignore. I couldn't simply let it slide. That evening, timing my return to coincide with my husband's arrival home from work, I made my way back to the house. "Whoa, look who's back," he greeted me with mock surprise. "I'm sorry. I'll do whatever you say from now on. Please let me back in the house," I pleaded, masking my rising anger behind a facade of submission. It was time to tighten the noose around him, to play the part of the obedient wife and bide my time. "Fine. From now on, I'm not giving you any living expenses. Do whatever you want," he declared, his arrogance undiminished. Without a word of dissent and without broaching the subject of divorce, I made it clear that I was onto him. Despite his continued despicable attitude, I remained resolute, laying the groundwork for the vengeance that simmered beneath the surface. Enduring my husband's deceit, I persisted in my search for evidence of his affair, scouring the house for any clue. Among his belongings, I discovered a trove of receipts for hotels and meals tucked away in his suit pockets, but alone, they felt like feeble proof. It wasn't until I delved into social media under the woman's name that her true identity was unveiled 2 weeks later. With all preparations in place, I found myself once again at the infamous Paris hotel. There they were, my husband and his mistress, brazenly indulging in dinner and public displays of affection, just as they had done before. Mustering my resolve, I approached them as they prepared to board the elevator. "What are you doing here?" my husband demanded, his tone defensive. "Why are you here?" "I am obviously here for a work meeting," I countered sharply, seizing the moment to confront him. Quickly disentangling himself from his mistress, my husband looked guilt-ridden, attempting to flee. "That's odd. Today's a day off, isn't it?" I pressed, my voice cutting through the tension. Turning in surprise, he stumbled upon a revelation. "What, Jackson? You're supposed to be on parental leave, right? How come you're working?" Caught off guard by my unexpected presence with his boss, my husband's feeble excuses faltered. Meanwhile, the mistress, identified as Ava, appeared uneasy and uncertain, her gaze fixed downward. Sensing the scrutiny of onlookers, I proposed a change of scenery. "Since we're drawing attention, let's move this to the room you guys booked. Unless you want me to scatter these photos around here. Is that okay?" I brandished the damning evidence, leaving my husband reeling. In a desperate bid to escape, he grabbed my arm and pulled me into the elevator. But Jackson intercepted, apprehending the fleeing mistress and bringing her along. "Why are you with Jackson?" my husband demanded, bewildered by the unexpected turn of events. "Since the day you kicked me out, I had nowhere to go. Jackson heard our daughter crying in the park and invited me in," I explained, seizing the opportunity to expose his hypocrisy. As we entered the room, a tense silence descended, marking the beginning of a confrontation long overdue. Dumping all the evidence onto the table, I watched as shock rippled across their faces. "What are these photos?" my husband stammered, his voice betraying a hint of panic. "I was here the day after you kicked me out of the house. It was shocking, but I took these as evidence of your affair," I explained, my tone steely with resolve. "That's low. That's my line," my husband retorted, his attempt to deflect criticism falling flat in the face of my accusations. His silence spoke volumes, but I pressed on. "I'm aware you used my savings without my consent. That money was a legacy from my mother," I continued, my voice unwavering. "That's our shared property. I don't see an issue with me using it," he countered, his arrogance grating against my sense of injustice. "It's not shared property. It's mine and mine alone," I insisted, refusing to back down. "You will return the $120,000 you used." "Come on, we're married. Let's not get into such tedious matters," he dismissed, his indifference fueling my frustration. Exhausted by his callousness, I reached into my bag and pulled out the divorce papers, slamming them onto the table with finality. "I'm fed up with you. Fill out these divorce papers immediately." "That's a leap, don't you think? Didn't I hear you say you wanted me to bring up divorce?" he protested, his attempt to deflect blame falling on deaf ears. I played a recording of the conversation we had during a previous meal, his hurtful words reverberating throughout the room. "Give me a break. Not a chance to think. You approached me just for my money," his voice echoed, each syllable a painful reminder of his betrayal. "It all became clear after I heard our conversation from that day. That's why you became so cold all of a sudden," I declared, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. "There's a lot to the situation. I don't want to hear any excuses or lies," I continued, my resolve unyielding. "Pay me $20,000 for the affair, $10,000 for all the times you mistreated me, $120,000 for the money you took from my savings, and $110,000 for child support until our daughter turns 20. That's a total of $260,000 in one lump sum." "What mistreatment?" he protested, his voice tinged with desperation. But there was no denying the truth of his actions. "You kicked me and our daughter out of the house in the middle of the night and didn't provide living expenses," I countered, my voice unwavering. Clearly caught off guard, he attempted to salvage the situation. "Just calm down. Let's talk this out," he pleaded, his tone bordering on pathetic. But there was no room for negotiation. "Don't mock me, and don't think you're out of this either. I'll be seeking $20,000 in damages from you too," I retorted, my gaze unwavering. Turning to face his mistress, I could see the color drain from her face. "I have to pay too, of course. But in return, I'm divorcing him, so you two can be open about your relationship. That should be a relief, right?" I remarked, my tone cutting. As the reality of his situation sank in, my husband's desperation reached a fever pitch. "Please spare me this one time. I'll be a good husband, I promise," he begged, his tears and snot a sorry sight. But his pitiful display only served to strengthen my resolve. Turning my back on him, I took the house keys and card case from his bag. "I sold the house that was in my name. Jackson reported everything to the company, and it seems you're going to be fired," I informed him, my voice devoid of emotion. As we left the room, I knew it was the end of an era. I didn't want to see my husband ever again, so I arranged for a divorce through a lawyer, I reflected, my mind already moving forward. I demanded compensation for the divorce, the money he had squandered, and child support. With his parents furious and his future uncertain, my husband's downfall was complete. Since he couldn't pay all the compensation in one go, his father forced him to work in a mine, I concluded, my voice tinged with finality. Leaving behind the remnants of my old life, my daughter and I embarked on a new journey. We bought a small apartment and started our new life, I recounted, a sense of relief washing over me. The moment we started living here, my daughter's night crying stopped completely. Grateful for Jackson's support and the opportunity for a fresh start, I knew that together, my daughter and I would build a home filled with happiness and love. My name is Mary, a 35-year-old employee. I was born with a weak constitution, often catching colds and missing school. Perhaps due to this, I didn't have many close friends. Even in middle school, my frailty didn't change. Classmates who didn't like this often approached me, saying, "Hey, you're supposedly sick and missing school, but in reality, you just want to play hooky, right? It must be nice having it so easy." We can't take off because our parents are strict. Honestly, I was envious. Being spoken ill of like that was a usual occurrence. I often came back home feeling hurt and wounded by the heartless words of my classmates. I felt as if there was an invisible wall between me and my classmates, making my middle school days particularly difficult. As an adult, I couldn't easily miss work for a minor fever, so I always put work first, even if it meant pushing myself. Especially as a new employee, my training supervisor was extremely stern. He constantly said things like, "Illness comes from the mind, show some spirit." So keeping up with it was quite a struggle. As my days were consumed by work, I noticed my peers getting married and becoming happy. It made me realize that I was reaching that age too. However, I never felt a rush to get married. I believed I would never find a kind person who would want to marry someone with my health issues. But life is unpredictable, and unexpectedly, a man who invited me out for a meal appeared out of the blue. This person is my husband, Thomas. "Hey, looks like you're finishing up for the day, right? If it's all right with you, would you like to grab dinner together?" Thomas was an elite, a graduate of a prestigious university, and was considered a future head of the department. He was not only competent at work but also cooperative and trusted by everyone around him. He had a personality completely opposite to my introverted one. I was surprised when he suddenly invited me to dinner. At first, I didn't even realize he was talking to me and thought he must have mistaken me for someone else. However, it seemed he was indeed inviting me, which even left me blurting out, "Ha!" Thomas was quite popular with the female employees because of his personality and good looks. It was a mystery to me why he was still single. Yes, I'm almost done with my work, so that would be fine. In the end, I couldn't refuse his invitation, so I went along for dinner. But this meal became the catalyst for the two of us to grow close quickly. He was very friendly, and the conversation flowed naturally. It was the first time in a long time I had been able to laugh and talk with someone other than family. Although I had to head home because of work the next day, I found myself wishing I could spend more time with him. We started spending more time together after that meal, and 3 months later, we began dating. Considering our ages, we decided to marry. A year after we started dating, we found a small apartment near the train station and moved in together. I never imagined I'd get married and truly believed I was about to start a happy life. I never expected this marriage to be the beginning of a nightmare. Shortly after getting married, he gradually began to reveal his true nature. After our marriage, I switched jobs and started working at a different company. It was a company with many female employees. During the interview, when I mentioned my health issues, they reassured me that with so many women working there, I shouldn't worry. Today, I was able to take a day off due to their understanding. "Hey, why are you sleeping? The head of the household is back. Shouldn't you welcome me home? You're so dumb." As soon as I got home, he came into the room with a sulky face, seemingly displeased that I hadn't greeted him. "I'm sorry. I was feeling unwell today and took the day off from work. I'm about to make dinner. Why don't you go take a bath first?" Upon hearing these words, Thomas, who was already in a bad mood, said, "Ha! You're just starting to make dinner now? When a husband comes home, it's obvious that dinner should be ready. Are you lying about being sick just because you want to skip household chores? You're such an incorrigible woman." His words reminded me of what my classmates used to say to me back in my school days. They would often say I was skipping class under the guise of being sick. Their words would always hurt my heart, but even when I was feeling sick, Thomas never helped with the chores. Instead, he treated me like a housemaid. Then one day, a certain incident happened. I felt particularly bad that day, with a fever exceeding 104 degrees and dizzy to the point where I couldn't even stand up. Ideally, Thomas should have taken me to the hospital, but instead, he grabbed his carry-on bag and walked straight out the front door without a glance at me. "Wait a minute. You're leaving me in this condition?" Shocked by his indifference, I couldn't help but shout, "It can't be helped. It was planned from before. Take care of the rest." With that, he really left the house. About 30 minutes after he left, my condition worsened. I called an ambulance myself and was taken to the hospital. My parents and my brother came rushing to the hospital as soon as they heard the news. While receiving an IV, I explained everything that had happened so far. As I spoke, both my parents' and brother's faces turned red. Leaving his sick wife behind to go on a trip, this behavior was unacceptable not only to my parents but also to me. That's why I decided to carry out a certain plan with my parents and brother. I did text him that I was hospitalized, and soon after, I got a message from Thomas. I'm about to head home, so I called the house, but no answer. Are you still in the hospital? Come home and cook my dinner. Seeing this message, my brother decided to call Thomas. Surprised by the sudden call from my brother from my phone, Thomas assumed it was me and started talking arrogantly. However, when he realized it was my brother, he immediately changed his tone and started apologizing. But it was too late. With a low, angry voice, my brother said to him, "Sorry to inform you, but Mary won't be coming back to that house. She passed away." What? Even Thomas couldn't hide his surprise at the shocking words that suddenly came out of my brother's mouth. However, he soon regained his composure and said with a nonchalant tone, "I see. Understood. Once things settle down, I'll take care of the necessary procedures. Thank you for everything till now," and with that, he hung up the phone. Wouldn't most people, upon hearing their wife had passed away while traveling, rush home in a panic? Yet he, far from showing concern, hasn't even asked about the funeral schedule. In other words, he couldn't care less about me. After that, I felt something snap within me. From then on, I decided to carry out a plan that my brother had devised while he was at work. I returned home. I deliberately cleaned up the messy room until it sparkled, folded the laundry that had been hung up, and put away the dishes, taking great care not to drop a single speck of dust. During that time, I checked things like the drains and toothbrushes. After doing this a few times, my brother received a call from him. "Hey, it's rare for you to call. What's up?" Although he spoke calmly, my brother's eyes were smiling. He probably knew he would get a call. Unaware of this, he said over the phone, Can I ask you something? Did you go into my room while I was out?" "Into your room? No, I didn't go in. Why would you ask that?" Perhaps even he, as insensitive as he is, found it eerie that the room was constantly sparkling clean, so he thought my brother was entering the room and called to confirm. The thing is, the room that was messy until this morning is incredibly clean. When I returned home, the trash on the floor was thrown away, the laundry is folded. Something is weird. "Did you come to pick up Mary's stuff?" Speaking with a tremor in his voice, my brother replied, "Oh, come on, there's no way I'd do that. I never got a spare key to your room for my sister when she was alive, and our mom has been too busy with work lately to visit you there, Thomas. You must be tired to think this way." Although it was my brother who planned it, I was the one carrying it out. Even for my brother, it was impossible to enter the room without permission. Therefore, in legal terms, it's still me, his wife, who was doing this. I, who was listening to the conversation next door, had a hard time not bursting out laughing. If your room was ransacked, I could understand, but it's clean. Is there a problem with that? No, that's not it. It seemed he had something he didn't want to say. My husband fell silent. A few days later, there was another call from him to my brother's cell phone. Apparently, strange things continued to happen after that, so he consulted with the police. However, the police officer did not take his story seriously. Because if things were missing, they could understand. But when he explained that the rooms were sparkling clean, the laundry was folded, they laughed and said, "Are you living alone? Maybe your mom came from your family home and cleaned up your room? Or did you forget that you cleaned up while you were drunk? Anyway, since nothing is missing, you should be grateful." That's unfortunate, but as the police officer said, nothing is missing. That's a good thing, right? Maybe Mary's spirit is lingering in your room, cleaning it up while you're away. Upon saying this, he seemed to take it seriously and hung up with a trembling voice. Eventually, considering the potential nuisance to others, I decided to reveal myself to my husband. One day, timing it perfectly with my husband Thomas's return, I entered the room to find him asleep on the sofa, his face flushed red. He might have come back from a drinking party, or maybe the alcohol helped him sleep better. The table and floor were strewn with cans of beer. It seemed like he had fallen asleep in his drunken stupor. Seeing him fast asleep and snoring, I decided to carry out a special surprise. I had in mind, what's going on? Thomas suddenly jumped as the light, which he thought had been turned off, suddenly switched on. Seeing me, whom he believed had passed away based on the information from my brother, he let out a gasp. Ariel, a ghost, an adult man, saw me and immediately yelled that I was a ghost, tears welling up in his eyes as he stared at me. I'm sorry. I didn't attend the funeral. I promised to pray for you, so please rest in peace." He mumbled these words while putting his hands together, trembling. "Look carefully. I've got legs, right? I'm not a ghost. I'm very much alive." Confirming the existence of my legs, he turned red with anger, this time glaring at me with a terrifying expression. What the hell do you think you're doing? Do you think this is acceptable? Plus, you've even involved my parents. Unforgivable. I'll take legal action against you for this. Yes, against the outburst. I was about to execute the real surprise. Suddenly, my mother, who had been waiting outside the entrance, went to call someone. The moment he saw the person, Thomas, who had been red with anger just a moment ago, turned pale and began to sweat profusely. What's wrong? You're pale and sweating. Are you feeling unwell? Maybe you should go to the hospital. It was understandable why his complexion was poor, because the person standing in front of him was someone he had recently traveled with. It was the woman with whom he had had an affair. In reality, my brother, suspecting Thomas's infidelity, had been talking to a friend who worked in the same company since I left the job. Thomas had been getting along well with a woman named Natalie, who worked at the reception of the same company. It seemed as if they were just friendly colleagues, but multiple employees had witnessed the two of them getting cozy in the break room, and rumors circulated in the company that the two might be dating. Many employees knew that he was married to me, so they immediately realized that their relationship was something more than just friendship. His good friends were torn between reporting this to me and the boss. They were hesitant because they were worried about me, who had always been weak, and how I might fall sick from the shock. Hearing this, the woman bowed her head and bit her lip, unbearably embarrassed. Thomas, feeling embarrassed, called his mother to explain the situation. In response, his furious mother shouted at us with a ferocious tone. What is this? Being my son like this, I've always disliked you. Despite not graduating from a prestigious university, you are so arrogant. On top of that, you all tricked my son and hurt him, which is unforgivable. I'll make sure you divorce. There will be no alimony. Whether it was because she had been shouting or not, she was taking heavy breaths, her shoulders heaving up and down. Of course, if she didn't know the situation, it was only natural for her to be upset, thinking we were bullying Thomas one-sidedly. However, my father spoke calmly, explaining the whole situation to my fuming stepmother. The first time she heard this, she had a look on her face that said she could hardly believe it. When he explained that her son had abandoned his wife, who was suffering from poor health, to go out with his mistress who was in the room, it seemed she finally noticed the presence of this mistress. Her previous bluster was gone, and she was simply shaken. The woman, feeling completely uncomfortable, bowed her head in apology to us. I am so sorry. I will fully pay you damages. Please forgive me. Unlike her flustered boyfriend and dazed mother-in-law, the woman bowed deeply and apologized. I had her write a promissory note on the spot. When I told her I would consult a lawyer at a later date, she responded in a frail voice, "Understood." I couldn't possibly forgive someone who had done this to me. I showed him the filled-out divorce papers and said, I can't possibly forgive you for this. I'm going to consult a lawyer about everything that's happened. After that, I divorced him. Because he didn't come to my aid when I was ill, I ended up receiving a significant amount of money. With that money, I rented a small apartment and have been commuting to work from there. The office is still full of talks about the two of them. But I don't know if it's because he's thick-skinned or what, but he continues to work as if nothing has happened. Hearing about that doesn't make me feel anything. If anything, I think, so that's what kind of man he was. I decided to try and forget about this as soon as possible and threw myself into my work even more than before. Even with difficult tasks, I worked hard to understand them while asking my boss, and it seems that my efforts were recognized as I was chosen for a 1-year overseas assignment. I am already fluent in English, so I won't have any trouble living abroad. Just as I was getting excited about my overseas assignment, I suddenly started getting repeated calls from an unknown number. Since it was an unknown number, I initially thought it was a wrong number, but since it kept calling over and over again, I thought it might be someone I know, and I answered the call. Huh? Who is this? When I cautiously asked, it turned out to be Thomas. It's been a while, Mary. Have you been well? I just wanted to hear your voice and ended up calling. Unbelievable. He called me casually after what happened. I wonder what he could think of me. The more I heard his voice, the angrier I became. What do you want now? I have nothing to discuss with you. After this call, never contact me again. Then he started talking with a desperate voice. Wait, just listen to me for a second. Actually, I married Natalie, but she doesn't do any housework at all. Since we got married, she doesn't clean at all. and all we eat are pre-made meals. On top of that, I've started to have to take care of my mother. Honestly, I'm in trouble. Although she looked beautiful and neat, in reality, she didn't do any housework. All the meals were grab-and-go food or ready-made meals, and she didn't clean, so the floor was covered in dust. On top of everything, he had to begin to take care of his mother, and in desperation, he turned to me for help. I couldn't help but let out a heavy sigh over the phone, and I felt more certain than ever that breaking up had been the right choice. I'm sorry, but I'm scheduled for an overseas assignment, and there's nothing I can do. Besides, she's the woman you chose. You can't blame anyone else. Take care of your own wife. Upon learning I couldn't assist due to my overseas posting, he pleaded, "Help me. Take me with you to your new overseas position. I can't stand this filthy woman anymore. Life was better with you. Give me another chance." But even if he asks for another chance, he wanted this outcome. No matter how much he struggles, he can't return to the previous state. He was still talking over the phone, but I left him hanging, said I had work, and ended the call. Then I blocked his number. He didn't like that. It seems that very day he showed up at my parents' house, demanding a remarriage and help, spouting nonsense. My father called the police, and he was taken to the station. The company found out about this, and he got fired. He also got divorced, and to pay alimony, he is helping out with the family business while taking care of his mother. Apparently, the family business is physically demanding and quite harsh, and he tries to run away from home many times. But each time he is brought back by relatives, and he seems to be having a hard time every day.
Story 1. I'm a male teen currently working part-time and have my own income. I'm also the oldest in my family. I have 4 younger siblings, 2 big brothers who are on the spectrum, and 2 sisters who are biologically my cousins and were adopted by my parents as babies. Both have Down syndrome. All 4 of my younger siblings have significant challenges and health issues. Over the years, it has drained my parents' resources and left very little for anything fun. Only when I started working 2 years ago could I afford to treat myself occasionally. Sometimes it's my favorite gummies, sometimes I save up to buy something. I bought myself a laptop earlier this year with my money because I needed something, especially with school and everything, and using the family computer doesn't work as much now because Dad works later in the day than he used to. For the last few months, I've paid for certain groceries for myself since there are so many different meals made in our house, and I usually end up with stuff I didn't enjoy. I decided to occasionally buy stuff so I could make myself something I'd like, and it was one less person for my mom to prepare food for. My brothers both have safe foods, and my sisters are also bad eaters who have limitations due to allergies and not enjoying the taste of many things. I know my parents have been struggling to afford all the safe foods, allergen foods, and stuff for themselves. A while ago, my dad asked if I could buy some family groceries for everyone, and I sat and asked him if I could get more of what I like for everyone, and he said no. He and my mom don't like the foods I eat, and my siblings couldn't and wouldn't eat them. He said just get the usual stuff and I can live off stuff I don't love. I told him I didn't want to do that I was trying to enjoy food more, and it was one less person for them to buy for. We compromised, and I would buy myself groceries on the time instead of sometimes. Then a couple of weeks ago, some food ran out, and my dad had to use his credit card to buy a few extra groceries. I was the only person who didn't run out that week. My parents were angry. They asked why I took care of myself so much but wouldn't help out the family. Mom said it's exhausting having to feed so many different people with different needs, and I could at least buy food for my siblings if I can't give a crap about her and Dad. They said I was selfish, and I should be thinking of my family over just me. My parents said I would probably let everyone starve before I help out, and then they accused me of resenting them for adopting my sisters and adding more additional needs kids to our family. But they said that's what family does, and I should be ashamed. They also said I should never have bought the laptop and could have helped out more financially without it. Am I the idiot? Not the idiot. Your parents are legally obligated to provide for you until you're 18, and they're not doing that. It sounds as though they were doing okay until you started earning money. You're already helping them out by paying for your own food. You've also provided your own laptop that your parents didn't have to pay for. When someone is drowning, the solution is not to drown with them, it's to find lifelines. There are programs that can help them. Your parents need to seek those out. Oh, you're not a parent. Don't let them turn you into one.
The fact that you have to work outside your home just to feed yourself indicates that they're failing to meet your needs. It seems your needs are coming dead last. If they want more money, they can get a job that pays better or work more hours. If you start buying groceries, you will never get out of this. Even if you move out, they'll still ask for your help. Oh sweetie, start saving your money so you can move out. Your parents bit off more than they can chew and need to reach out to the countless resources that are available to them. The best place to start is the caseworker. If I were you, I'd contact DCF myself and explain exactly what you said. Your family is struggling to make ends meet after adopting and pressuring you to provide. They won't be in trouble. They'll be provided resources and help for all of you. Also, you may want to hide your laptop. They sound very resentful about it, and I don't know what type of people they are. It's understandable that your family is struggling, but it isn't your struggle. Good luck. Story 2. A household dealing with the intrusion of a nanny who is overly comfortable, bringing her dogs and leaving belongings around. I have a nanny who comes to look after my little ones, a toddler and preschooler 3 times a week. She arrives in the morning when I leave for work at 8 o'clock a.m. and leaves with my husband or me when we get home at 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock p.m. She's been quite good with the kids, which is fine, but the only problem is she's making herself at home too much. The first problem is that she'll randomly leave things at our place overnight, such as a coat or car seat, etc. She'll also sometimes put small bits of food in our fridge and leave it overnight when she's coming the next day. But what irks me the most is the dogs. She has 2 dogs. One is a chocolate Labrador and the other is a Great Dane. I really don't like dogs. Originally, I said she couldn't bring them with her when she asked. One day, she had to bring them with her because her garden was being landscaped, so I let her but told her to keep them outside. Well, since then, she just kept bringing them. I didn't say anything since it wasn't that big of a deal and not worth the hassle. Incrementally, she's letting them get away with more and more. She first tied them up to the fence, and then she started letting them run free in the yard. Then one time it was raining, and she asked me if it was okay for them to come into the house for a bit and just stay in the kitchen. And now they're just let free rein. It's in the terms of the dogs that she's making herself too much at home. I find random chewed up tennis balls in the yard, and she set up a couple of metal bowls near the back door. The other day, I found a bag of dog treats in the pantry that I'm assuming is hers. Probably the worst of all is that she takes them out to do their business. I don't even want to think about all the dog do that would be in my yard and bags the poop. But then she leaves the poop by the front door next to her handbag and dog leashes, so I normally come home to a few of those bright green bags of her dog do at my front door. It's just so gross. I want to say something to her, but my husband tells me not to. He's saying that we need her to look after the kids and that it would come across as offensive to tell her that. He said it's just minor things and to not really worry about it. We only need her until the kids are school age anyway. He's quite serious, and we've been arguing over it quite a bit. Am I the idiot for telling her to stop making herself so much at home? I feel like she's just done it bit by bit so we didn't notice, but looking back, she's basically starting to slide into the household. Not the idiot. She's an idiot because you gave her an inch, and she took a marathon's worth of miles. She's taking advantage of you, and it's completely inappropriate as an employee. Let's look at this in terms of regular workplace etiquette. All workplaces will let you leave a jacket in your work area or a small amount of food in the fridge, so those are reasonable accommodations. Would an office allow dogs when it's been previously communicated that dogs aren't allowed? No, making yourself comfortable is not a big deal, but bringing dogs is a no. You need to communicate that to her. She's utilizing your lack of limits to her advantage. If your husband won't listen, you might need to have a direct conversation with the nanny yourself. Story 3. A husband frustrated with his wife's tendency to dominate conversations with lengthy, branching stories due to untreated ADHD. I'm a femme 32, currently 8 months pregnant with our first child. My husband and I, like a lot of couples, debrief after our work days. My husband works in a high-touch, high-interaction job, so we usually say our hellos, make dinner, and then eat separately so he can wind down a bit. Then afterward, we sit in the living room and chat. My wife, Polly 32, has mild neurodivergence, untreated ADHD, which means she tells, let's call it, branching stories. She'll get bogged down inside side stories, background stories, and details that add nothing to the core story about her workday. That's usually fine,
But I've noticed it getting worse to the point that by the time she's done, it's time to watch a show and go to bed. I mean, I'm spending upwards of an hour just listening and adding and oh wow, because she says she gets even more distracted when I ask questions. I brought this up with Polly, and she said that I'm asking her to mask her disorder, and that's just how her brain works. I get that feeling, but I'm starting to feel like I'm a side character here because she takes up all the airtime we set aside to debrief. Here's why I might be an idiot. I said, well, we all change our communication styles based on context, right? And she said that's different and that masking is not code switching. I just want some time to talk about my day too, but I don't want her to feel bad. Am I the idiot? Not the idiot. There's no reason why you guys can't take turns telling the day stories. Also, you say she's untreated. Well, she needs to get treated. It sounds a lot like your wife really enjoys when other people accommodate her divergent behaviors, but really hates having to manage them to adapt to the more typical behavior of others. She has to give you some path forward that's not essentially you just need to deal with my crap. My mom does this constantly. Is this a neurodiverse symptom? I don't think wanting to share your life with her is expecting her to mask. This may not work with your wife, but I tell my mother I'm losing the thread of her story, so can she get back to the main path? Another thing I do is time box her. I let her know I have 30 minutes to talk when I call her. Yes, she does 99.98% of the talking. And that's fine. But at the 25-minute mark, I interrupt her and tell her I only have 5 minutes left. This is one of my biggest pet peeves. Get to the point, people. You're not asking her to mask anything. You're asking her to work on her disorder to make things easier. You're not trying to get her to pretend she doesn't have the disorder, not asking her to lie about it, and not asking her to hide it. You're asking her to try different things to curb it, like my family members counting to 3 when they were about to lose their temper, or asking a person with memory issues due to PTSD to write themselves notes. Learning how to participate in society is okay. Story 4. A woman conflicted about her sister wanting to use her address fraudulently to enroll. I have a sister, Jane, who is a single mother to her autistic son, James. James was having a hard time at his school. His school district is severely underfunded, and they do not give a crap. The schools where I live are pretty nice, and my neighbors who have kids said that they have a lot of great programs for kids like him. Since I had extra money, I decided to offer to let Jane and James move in with me so he could go to school here. Since he started, he's been doing great here. The teachers and aides are much more engaged than at his old school. They've been helping him work through some of his behaviors as well. While my other sister, Leah, is being weird about it though. The school that James attends has better teachers and aides and has a lot of other activities and resources, and in general, it's just a lot nicer. Leah and her family live in the same town that Jane and James used to live in, so her kids go to the underfunded school. Now she wants to send her kids to school here too. However, they're not taking any out-of-town students, so Lee wants to use my address and send her kids to school here. From what I've seen online, it looks like it can be considered fraud to do that. It's a fairly tight-knit community. People would figure out what we were doing and that they didn't live here. So I don't want to take the risk. Besides, Leah's kids aren't having trouble in school. Their school may not be the best, but they're doing okay. Still, Lee thinks it's unfair that I won't help her kids get out of the crappy school by using my address when I let Jane and James move in so that they can go to school here. Am I the idiot? Not the idiot. There are ways to enrich children's educational development that don't involve fraud. Your sister needs to look into that. It's great of you to provide your nephew with special needs resources. He really needed you. You've shown kindness and support within your means, and it's okay to set boundaries to ensure the well-being of all involved. Jane and James moved in with you so he can legitimately attend school in your district. No fraud involved. Is it fair of Leah to pressure you to commit fraud, aka helping out so you have to lie and cheat to be fair to her kids? This is a false equivalency. Leah can get better schools for her kids like Jane did. Move into the district. It's fraud, and the last thing you want is to be held liable for your sister doing something shady. I highly suggest that if your sister is talking to you by phone over this, you text her your refusal to allow her to do this, and you keep a copy of that on the cloud so that you have proof that you said no to her suggestion. I'm telling you this because as much as I know you might not want to think this, your sister sounds like the type who would go ahead and use your address anyway.
She sounds like the type who would falsify a utility bill or whatever to show residency there.